Good morning, everyone. We're just going to give a minute for everyone to join from the waiting room, and then we will get started with today's presentation. Okay, the waiting room seems to be slowing down a little, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for joining us today for supporting survivors of domestic violence with Jen Bolton in honor of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. My name is Charlotte Hoff, and I am the Communications and Training Specialist here at MOVA. I'm just going to go over some logistics quickly before passing it over to our presenter. This is a Zoom webinar, so you cannot be seen or heard as audience members, but you can see the presenters and the presentation once it begins. If you have questions during the presentation, please use the Q&A function found at the bottom of the Zoom screen to ask them. We will answer questions throughout today's session. We do have cart captioning available during today's workshop. To see the closed captions, go to the bottom of the screen, click on the up arrow next to closed caption, and choose Show Subtitle. If you are having trouble seeing closed captions or have any other tech issues today, please use the chat function to message all panelists, and we will be happy to assist you. It is now my pleasure to introduce our presenter for today. Jen Bolton is the Director of Prevention and Education at DOVE. She gives presentations, trainings, and workshops to community members, professionals, and students on domestic violence. She also maintains a small caseload supporting survivors of domestic violence in group and individual settings. I'll now pass it over to you, Jen. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Great. Thank you, Charlotte. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. I'm going to share my screen so we can all see. All right. So again, thank you for joining us this morning for a discussion on supporting survivors of domestic violence. Again, my name is Jen Bolton, and I am the Director of Prevention and Education for DOVE, which is located in Quincy. So I want to thank MOVA for having us present today. Always happy to participate in any Domestic Violence Awareness Month trainings, and excited to share this content with you all today. This slide has some more information on contacting MOVA. So the first thing that I want to start with this morning is just going over some of the services that are available in the state of Massachusetts. So DOVE is one of many service providers. As you can see here, we all operate under the organization Jane Doe, which is the statewide coalition against domestic and sexual violence. And there are quite a few organizations that offer very similar services to what DOVE offers. So DOVE is located right here in Quincy. And as you can see, we break out service areas by region. So there's Greater Boston, Northeast, Southeast, Central, and Western. So if you are working with someone that wants to access services, wants to talk to somebody about what's happening in their relationship, might be looking for shelter, calling a hotline, you can go to janedoe.org, which is in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. At the top of their website, you can click on Find Help, and then you can put in that person's zip code, city or town, and it will show you any services that are provided in that area. And so that way people can know where's the closest, what services are available, and get connected to someone. There are a few services that are available that are specialized services that are for folks that are part of special communities. So we have The Network Lored, which exclusively serves folks in the LGBTQ population. And then we also have a few language specific programs. So the Asian Task Force Against Domestic Violence is based in Boston, but serves people all across the state. And then we also have under statewide programs, you can look at SafeLink. SafeLink is the statewide hotline for looking for domestic violence shelter space. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about how difficult it can be to find shelter space in Massachusetts. But instead of someone you're working with having to call each shelter in the state individually, people can call this one number and it will let them know if there's any shelter beds available in the whole state and then connect them to that program. So we'll come back to this. I'm going to talk a little more specifically about what we do at Dove, so you know where we're coming from, but also our services are very similar to a lot of the other domestic violence services across the state. So I can sort of give you an idea of the kind of support that's available for people. So I wanted to start by saying you are welcome to ask questions at any time. I know Charlotte mentioned using the Q&A feature. Charlotte's gonna jump in, interrupt me, and I'll pause a few times here or there just to give people a chance to ask some questions or share anything that they might want to share. So Dove has two separate locations. We have a shelter program, and then separate from that, we also have a community service office. So our shelter is pretty small. We can house 6 families at a time, which is a pretty typical size for domestic violence shelters across the state. We have lots of supportive programming available for people. And so when people come to us, we have support groups. Each family has their own individual advocate that works on them with goal setting, safety planning, emotional support, and really kind of helping to find out what was going on in your life that brought you into this shelter and how can we help to create a plan for you to move forward in a safe way. We do operate a 24-hour hotline out of the shelter as well. So that's a great resource for people that are in a non-emergency situation, but might want to talk to somebody about something that just happened, get some support, some help safety planning. Maybe someone's not ready to come and talk to somebody in person, but wants to kind of talk to a domestic violence advocate over the phone. So I want to talk a little bit more about shelters in the state. I know many of you here may be very familiar with this, are doing a lot of victim services work. For some folks, it may be less known that it is really, really difficult to get into a domestic violence shelter in the state of Massachusetts. There are no wait lists. Programs are not prioritizing for risk. It is just first come, first serve. Because of the high cost of living in the state, the long wait lists for state housing, public housing, people are sort of backed up in the shelter system and are staying in the same shelter for what was originally supposed to be 20 years or so ago, maybe 30 days, 60, 90 days. Folks are now having a more typical stay of 1.5 to 2 years. And so as you can imagine, it's taking that long for people to be able to find safe housing. People are staying with us longer, which then results in having very low turnover and very low spots that are available for people. And so it's something that I really share a lot about when going out and talking about the services that are available in the state, because so often we get calls on our hotline from other service providers saying, you know, I'm sitting with somebody, they need to get into shelter. How do I get them in right away? They need the space. Like where can they go? Where do they meet you? And sometimes it's really new information that we're full and the whole state is full. And I think the last update was that there was only 182 beds in the whole state of Massachusetts just for domestic violence. So this is separate from like the emergency assistance sheltering program, where they will put people in hotels. They might have family shelters, but just specifically for domestic violence shelters, there are very, very small number of beds available. So of course, people are asking, what do people do? We work with people to try to establish some other options, thinking about family and friends that they can stay with, how to stay safe if possible in their home, and then most importantly, connecting somebody with a domestic violence counselor. And so that is a service that we have very readily available for folks. People can come to our office for in-person meetings. We also offer virtual appointments, and people can meet with a counselor totally free of charge. All of our services are free of charge. We don't go through insurance, so there's no co-pays. People can join a support group, meet other people that have been in similar experiences. People can meet, like I said, with an individual advocate or counselor. We have advocates that meet with both children and adults, work on safety planning, understanding the dynamics of what has happened in their relationship, provide some emotional support. We also have 2 advocates that specialize in working with folks that hold certain identities. So we have an LGBTQ outreach advocate that meets specifically with people that are in the LGBTQ community, and also that staff person does outreach specifically to that community. And then we also have an advocate that speaks Chinese and can meet with victims and survivors that would prefer to meet with a counselor that also speaks Chinese. So we also have a pretty extensive legal program. We have 5 attorneys that can meet with folks, help with restraining orders, renewals, custody, child support. Again, all totally free to victims and survivors. You don't need to qualify in any way, just how our services are set up. We don't have attorneys that can take on full representation, so like a full divorce case, but can help people understand how to represent themselves, connect people to a pro bono or a low-cost attorney, and really help people get pointed in the right direction. We also have a civilian domestic violence advocacy program. And so we have several staff members that cover about 8 different police stations across our catchment area. So you can see all the police stations listed below. So those advocates, they work for Dove, but they sit at these police stations. And anytime someone in one of these towns calls the police for a domestic violence incident, someone from Dove follows up with them. Are you okay? Do you know that there's free services that are available? Offer some emotional support, and then check in about the police response. So the goal is to provide some feedback to these police stations about how to respond in a way that is supportive of survivors, that's informed, that folks are asking the right questions and offering the right types of resources and support. So lastly, we also have a prevention and education department. We do lots of trainings with other service providers. We do a teen dating violence prevention program in high schools and middle schools, talking to students about what healthy relationships look like, really trying to do some prevention. So people either know what services are available if they need help, or can spot some of those red flags early on, or look at their own behaviors for indicators that they might be exhibiting signs of control themselves. So I'll pause for 1 second. If people have any questions about either the services that we have at Dove, what's available across the state. Sometimes people have a lot of questions or are like really surprised and understandably sort of upset about the availability of shelter. So I'll pause for a second if anybody has any questions about any of the services in the state or how to connect people.
I'm not seeing any questions yet, but we'll give it another minute. And then, as Jen said as well, keep questions coming in the Q&A as you have them. We'll pause frequently throughout the presentation to answer any that you have.
Great. People don't need any kind of referrals. People can just call directly themselves. And so we try to take all the red tape out so people can get connected right away. So I know that everyone here, you signed up for a discussion or a workshop on domestic violence. Most of you are already doing a lot of victim services. So this is something that you're used to, but I do like to just mention that this is a really heavy topic. It is unfortunately extremely common. So all of us sitting here, it's very likely that you know someone that is affected by this, a family member, a friend, a coworker, or might be thinking about one of your own relationships. And so I'm going to be showing a couple videos. We're going to be talking about tactics of abusive people. And so if at any time, just a reminder that you are welcome to step away, turn down your volume, do whatever you need to do to take care of yourself. Okay, so again, I want to acknowledge there's probably a lot of expertise here in this workshop, a lot of people that have been doing this for a long time. There might be some domestic violence advocates in here that have a lot of experience with all this. I'm going to quickly go through some of the basics just for people that might not have had a training like this in a while or are newer to this field, and then we'll get a little bit more into talking about some misconceptions, talking about some tactics, and talking a little bit more in depth about safety planning. So to start, for how we define domestic violence, we're really looking for an imbalance of power and control. And so oftentimes people still will call us saying, my partner's never put their hands on me. They've never been physically abusive. Can I still get services at Dove? Yes, of course. So we work with a lot of people that have experienced emotional abuse, verbal abuse. Their partner has never put their hands on them or been physical in any way, but their relationship can be very scary and still can be very, very controlling. So what we know is that without intervention, abusive relationships almost always escalate the abuse in frequency and in severity. And so again, this is not a one-time loss of control. What we're really looking for is a pattern of behavior. It does not have to be physical, and the behavior serves a purpose. And so when we sort of look at folks that might say like this came out of nowhere and this person had never been abusive before, we sometimes can still break that down and look for a pattern in that this behavior might be new, the specific behavior, but there's been a pattern over time of doing things that are limiting this person's control over their life. So I'll go into a little more detail about that. A really important takeaway is that the behavior itself is not the point, right? So sometimes people come to us and will be trying to figure out their relationship, trying to determine if it's abusive or not, and will say, my partner throws things, or they punch the wall, right? And so we might be quick to say, okay, yep, that's abusive. That person is destroying things. What we really want to do is step back for a second and look at some of the context, the intent, and then the effect. And so breaking things, punching walls, never a healthy behavior in a relationship. Definitely indicates that there's some issues, some things that person needs to get help with or work on. But what we're really looking at is what is the purpose that behavior is serving. And so if this person had a bad day, I don't know, someone cut them off in traffic and they got a flat tire and got in an argument with their coworker, and they come home and, the cat, tripped over the cat, and they just are like, that's it. And I throw my mug across the kitchen and I break it. Not a healthy behavior, but it's much different intention than if I'm in an argument with my partner and I want to regain control of this argument. And to do that, I'm going to do something scary and threatening, and I'm going to smash my mug in an intimidating way that scares my partner. That's with the purpose of gaining control, right? And so you're looking at the larger context. What's the intention? And then what's the effect of that behavior? And so those strategies or those questions to ask yourself is a much more effective way of determining if a relationship or if a behavior is abusive, rather than just looking at just the behavior itself. So we often talk with people about relationships existing on a spectrum. And so all relationships sort of fit somewhere on the spectrum. They might ebb and flow a little bit. Ideally, we want our relationships to be on this end, to be healthy, to be based around equality, respect, and trust, to feel supportive, to feel peaceful. We might not all relate. No relationship is perfect. No relationship is going to exist without some conflict. But when we start to see a relationship a little bit more in the middle of this spectrum, we might see a relationship that's unhealthy, that has a lot of arguing, a lot of dishonesty. It might feel really frustrating and hurtful. One or both people might be selfish. And so we start to see a relationship here. What's key is that there's no control happening. There's not one person trying to have power over the other. As soon as when we get to the other end of the spectrum, is when we see an abusive person trying to establish power over their partner, with the goal of having more control over them. And so that can feel scary. People can feel trapped. It can feel very overwhelming. It can sometimes be hard to see the difference between unhealthy and abusive. And so sometimes people will come to us with a relationship that is not in a good place. And like I mentioned, there's a lot of conflict. There might be one or both partners might be unfaithful. There might be name calling and things like that. And so what we'll ask is more questions that help us determine if there's a power imbalance in the relationship. Is one person's life getting smaller? Is one person trying to make all the decisions in the relationship? If yes, that's likely an abusive relationship. We're going to want to meet with that person. It seems like both folks, like there's not a clear power differential, but there's certainly a lot of conflict. That's someone that we might refer to individual therapy to work on some of the issues, but it's not really a fit for what we do for our services. So quickly want to mention some terminology. And so you might hear a lot of these different terms used to describe people or to describe domestic violence. We most commonly use the term abusive person in the courts or legally, you might hear people referred to as the perpetrator or the offender. A little bit more outdated term people will use batterer. Kind of really implies that that person has been physically abusive, which is not always the case. And the reason, although it's a very small change, I think can be impactful, particularly to survivors, that we've moved away from just calling somebody the abuser, in that this person sometimes is also a lot of other things to this person. And so like they might also be the parent of their children, someone that they've lived with for a long time, someone that they've loved or cared for. And so sort of referring to them just as the abuser can sort of be othering in a way. And so sometimes saying the person that is using abuse, the person using harmful behaviors, can be a little bit more understanding that although what this person is doing is unacceptable, they can or have been in their life more than just an abuser. So we most typically, or I will use the term abusive relationships. Our field really uses still the term domestic violence. That's sort of the most recognizable term. Why sometimes I will choose to use abusive relationships instead is because a lot of people don't live with their partners, so it's not domestic. It might not be violent, what someone's experiencing, and so abusive relationships kind of help to encompass all of that. The medical field will often use intimate partner violence. So all of these terms are interchangeable. Partner abuse is also something commonly used. We typically use the word survivor. Some people choose or prefer to describe their experience as being a victim. And then a term we do not use anymore is battered women. Although people still will always say, oh, you work for Dove, the Battered Women's Program. And so we really are trying to spread the word that it's an outdated term for a few reasons. Of course, anyone can experience abuse, not only women, and it's not just physical abuse, which is what's implied by battering. So when I went over our services at Dove, I should have also, and usually sort of explicitly say that we work with people of all genders, all sexual orientations, anyone, both in the shelter and in our community service office. So anyone that has experienced abuse in their relationships can come and seek services. People that identify as gay and lesbian experience almost the same rates as folks in straight relationships for domestic violence. The trans community and also bisexual women experience even higher rates of domestic violence, not because of their identities, but because of transphobia and homophobia and the lack of support around some of those identities. An abusive person can use that to their control or to their benefit to have more control over their partner. So if you leave me, I'm going to tell everyone, I'm going to out you, or I'm going to claim that I'm being abused by you. And so really kind of manipulating that person's identity. Okay. Again, feel free in the chat or questions. Charlotte's going to interrupt me at any time. So
I'll ask the couple that are in there now, then I want to wait for a good place.
Go
So
ahead.
we do have a couple questions in there, and we have a few around services for children. So does
Great.
Dove offer counseling services for children? And then specifically, sort of what services do you offer for children who are being sexually assaulted in their home?
So we do have a children's counselor, and so she can meet with anyone that's under 18 years old. For folks that are children that are on the younger end, she does a lot of play therapy. She'll have the parent, the non-offending parent, in the room often, having some discussions around what's happened, talking with the parent about how to support their child and talk about anything that they might have witnessed. She also meets with young people, so teens likely, that have experienced some abuse in their own relationships. And so that's all under all of our community services. So again, is totally free of charge. It's the same intake process. Most of what she does is, so we're a domestic violence organization. Some of our sister organizations are dual organizations where they do both domestic violence and sexual assault as well. We are just domestic violence. And so if someone was experiencing sexual assault in the home, we would probably refer them out to a sexual assault program, and certainly one that specifically works with children.
Another question is, do you know about how many DV cases were registered in Massachusetts in 2021?
How many DV cases? This might answer your question. So was there another question? Because I can answer that for this slide.
There is one more question. Well, first I'll just jump in. I saw in the chat and Brenna did answer. Someone asked about getting the slides for today, and we are able to distribute the PDF of the slides to all attendees as well as a recording. So I just wanted to verbally say that as well. And then we have two other questions for you in the Q&A. The first is, do your legal services support parents who are divorcing to protect children from the abuser in the home?
Do our legal services protect children? Can you repeat that?
Yeah. Do your legal services support parents who are divorcing to protect children from the abuser in the home? So I think, do your support services protect parents and children going through a divorce?
Yes. So the identified victim would be the client, and we would work with that parent to get a restraining order if that's appropriate or wanted, to put together requests for custody. So yes, we would work with a family around that, but might not provide full representation around an entire case.
Okay. And sort of on the other side of the spectrum for age, what sort of services are available for older adults 60 and older?
So all of our services are available to older adults. We do also work with South Shore Elder Services. If we have someone that needs some additional support, we can kind of network with them as well. And so we have a partnership with that office in Braintree, but we'll kind of loop them in.
Okay, and then sorry, one more question related to older adults that I'm seeing in the chat, and then we'll sort of move on, and definitely keep the questions coming, and we'll pause again in a bit to answer more. So this question is, if abuse refers to the imbalance of control with situations involving someone with severe mental health issues, such as schizophrenia or elders who have dementia, still be considered abusive if the victim is the main caregiver?
So if the victim is the caregiver?
Yeah, so I think it's asking if the person who's receiving care and has severe mental health issues is the abusive person, would it still be considered abusive if they're abusing their caregiver?
So I think, I'm not sure if the question's asking like that there's certainly a power imbalance there. If one person has the right over the other to make medical decisions, financial decisions, that's where we want to look not just at the behavior, but the intention behind it and the context. And so there are relationships that we will all be in that do have an imbalance of power, but it's looking at what's the intention there. So if someone has control over someone's finances because they're disabled or they're identified as their guardian and are doing it to care for that person, then yes, it's an imbalance of power, but it's not with the intention to have control. I hope that was answering the question.
If the person who asked that question has any follow-up questions, definitely feel free to drop them in the Q&A, but hopefully that answered that question. Again, keep the questions coming in the Q&A. We'll stop again in a bit to answer some more. Yeah, thank you for all those questions, everyone.
Great. So this, I hope, might get to some of the questions about prevalence. So this is specific to the state of Massachusetts. Every year for the last 16 years, the National Network to End Domestic Violence does sort of a snapshot. And so they take one day in September is usually when they do it. Yep, September 9th. So this is last year, 2021. They ask all domestic violence organizations across the state to write in and share what services they offered that one day. And so this is just like what it looks like in one day in Massachusetts. And so in this one day last year, there were 2,300 victims served in one day. There were 508 hotline calls. There were still 332 unmet needs. over half of which were for shelter. And so this kind of can just give you a little bit of an idea of what the need looks like, what one day in Massachusetts might look like as far as domestic violence. So we don't have a statistic for domestic violence incidents, but we do have, of course, homicide rates. And so this is year-to-date 2022. Jane Doe tracks any domestic violence homicides that happen in the state. And so last year, there were 13 homicides. Unfortunately, I believe this was done, I think updated in August, and there has been several domestic violence homicides since then. So unfortunately, this number will be increasing, but this can give you a little bit of again, sort of a snapshot, at least for this past year, of how many homicide victims there were. So people that were killed by their partners just in Massachusetts. So I'm gonna quickly go through again for people that might be a little newer to this field, just a little bit about what to look for or listen for when you are meeting with someone, when you're wanting to help someone. Some of these types of abuse are much more obvious. We know to look for bruising and listen for physical abuse like kicking and punching and shoving. But some of the ones that we're going to talk about are a little bit more subtle. And so we're going to talk about those in more detail. I have a short video that I'm going to show from the Join One Love organization that has a lot of great content. It just talks a little bit about some red flags, things that people might initially see as being a sign of love and affection that can turn into ways to have control over somebody.
They make me feel like I'm the most special person in the world.
I love how they're always texting me.
She wants to spend all her time with me.
They fell for me really quickly.
Sometimes he gets jealous when I talk to other guys.
I feel like I have to walk on eggshells around them.
She said she was drunk. It was no big deal. He tells me I'm overreacting and being crazy.
They told everyone at school that we're a couple before I was ready to be out.
He tells me he can't live without me.
She tells me I'm lucky to be with her.
If you saw the signs of an unhealthy relationship, would you be able to recognize them?
1 in 3 women.
1 in 4 men.
And 1 in 2 transgender or gender nonconforming people
Will be in an abusive relationship.
One Love is on a mission to stop that.
You can help us today by donating at Join One Love.
Join One Love.
JoinOneLove.org.
So again, a lot of great resources on that website. Really encourage you to check it out. Lots of great, really high quality videos, especially they have a lot that are geared towards young people. So want to mention also sexual abuse. We often just look for what someone might more stereotypically talk about or disclose as rape, and really think about expanding that our understanding of that definition a little bit, that people can be in relationships with someone else where there is coerced sex, where someone feels guilted, manipulated, blackmailed into doing something that they are not comfortable with or not okay with. We have people that share with us the feeling of needing to engage in sexual activity as a way to keep peace in the home, as a way to ensure that this abusive person will continue to give child support, will continue to allow use of the car to get to work, and not have accusations of infidelity and cheating and whatnot. And so often can look different than someone might think of as a sexual assault or rape, but certainly is someone that is feeling forced or coerced to engage in something that they are not interested in participating in. And so we're always reminding folks that just because you're in a relationship with someone, of course, does not mean that that your consent is not needed. And so important conversations around that can be helpful to victims and survivors. Financial abuse, often very overlooked, is probably one of the biggest reasons that people are unable to leave an abusive relationship. The workplace is often where an abusive person first targets. So if somebody is financially independent, successful, they have a lot of coworkers that are checking in on them, they're connected to people, they have their own income revenue, it's very hard to have control over someone in their life if those things are true. So we'll see people that are abusive showing up at their partner's workplace, causing a scene, maybe making a lot of phone calls, trying to distract that person from being able to be productive, causing them to be late, causing them to miss work, ultimately causing them to lose their job, which really can in turn cause them to lose a lot of control over their life. So there may be explicit things like not allowing their partner to have access to money for basic needs, running up a lot of debt, ruining that person's credit, putting a lot of bills in that person's name, or some more subtle ways of maybe telling the person, you know what, you don't need to finish school, you don't need to go, to your job, like I can take care of us financially. That can seem like a really generous offer, and then looking more closely into it, sometimes we can see that the real intention is to have control over that person. Always see some form of emotional abuse in abusive relationships. Again, the first thing that we'll see is somebody that is attacking someone's self-esteem. If I can make you question yourself, make you think that other people don't like you, you're a terrible parent, your friends all talk about you behind your back, your family doesn't care about you. If I can isolate you and bring down your self-esteem, it is a really great recipe for having control over someone. And so that's where we look at the identifier of if someone's life is getting smaller. Someone that maybe at one time was working, had friends, was in a book club, was, an active part of their church or their community and volunteered, and then slowly over time has less and less contacts, maybe looking at that as, could this be an initiative of someone that is abusive, trying to have control over that person? Mind games, we hear a lot about the term gaslighting. Recently has become sort of a buzzword. Sometimes is a little overused, we'll see on social media, but the real definition of gaslighting is someone that is very intentionally creating a situation that forces you to question your sanity and reality. So it's a little more insidious than just saying, I never said that, or, telling someone you don't believe them. And so we're working with a woman whose partner was an attorney in the community, was well known and well respected. He was also very abusive to her. Came home, there was a physical incident between them, and she called the police. He was able to compose himself in such a drastic way that he was able to convince the police officers that she had completely made up this this violent incident between them, and was so convincing that he convinced her that she had made it all up in her head as well. And she said that it was like the next day or 2 days later that she had all this bruising come out across her chest and her shoulders. And wasn't until then that she believed herself that what actually she remembered happening was true. And so that's kind of a more of an example of gaslighting, is like creating such a distressing environment that person really genuinely starts to question their own reality. So a couple other forms that I want to mention. Digital abuse is so unfortunately easy to do this now. You don't need to be tech savvy. Unfortunately, you don't need to have any special tech knowledge or information. You can require that your partner turn on Find My iPhone, that they have their location on, and you all of a sudden you get to know where that person is all the time. So again, this is kind of a good example of looking at the context and the intent and not just the behavior. I know a lot of people that share their location with their spouse. My mom, I'm an adult married with kids, and my mom's always like, you got to have your location on. I want to know where you are. And I'm like, you don't need to know where I am all the time. And so I don't have that on, but that's an example of like, it's not the behavior itself. There are a lot of couples that share location with each other. What we are looking at is the intention behind that. Why is this person wanting your location? Is it because they're concerned about your safety? Or is it because they want to know where you are all the time? And that's a hard thing to figure out. Most abusive people are not going to come out and say, although some will, I get to know where you are all the time. And if you're hiding it, then you must be doing something wrong. Most will try to spin something for, I'm worried about you. I want to know that you're safe. And so a lot of the work that we do is helping people figure out what is the intention, what is the larger context or purpose behind this behavior. Other things to look out for, like someone whose partner is constantly calling or texting them, demanding their passwords, looking through their phone, threatening to share confidential pictures or information. And lastly, I want to mention cultural and identity abuse. I talked a little bit about this with the LGBTQ community and threatening to out your partner, but we will also see this with folks that we work with, maybe that have newly immigrated to this country. Maybe their partners have not completed the right paperwork and now they've become undocumented. And they use that, they threaten their partner, if you call the police, if you report me, then you'll be deported. They might prevent their partner from learning English. They might say, I'll translate for you, and then incorrectly translate information. And so we see a lot of strategies that an abusive person might use to have control when it comes to someone's identity. I was working with someone who had recently come to this country and was in a really scary, really abusive relationship. And her partner told her, like, you're not a citizen, so you can't call the police. The police aren't going to respond unless you're a citizen. And so we know that's not true, but I could certainly, that seems believable if someone told me that and I was new to a country. And so really using that to have control over someone. I did see a question that was just about, do we help folks that are undocumented? We do have an immigration attorney, and so that is one of the areas that we are able to support people around, especially there's some special visas that are some people might be eligible for if their partner has been abusive, so that they're able to stay.
I'm going to jump in with a couple other questions that have
Yeah.
come in. The first is, what DV prevention programs do you currently have?
So I mentioned the teen dating violence prevention program that we do in middle schools and high schools. And so we have a 6-part series that we do with middle school students, all the way from 6th to 8th grade, talking about first healthy friendships, the connection that has to dating, and then starting to talk a little bit more about unhealthy behaviors, how to have a safe breakup, where to go in your school for help. In high school, we'll start talking about some more controlling behaviors, how to help a friend, how to intervene in a safe way. We have a peer leader model, and so we train students to come into their health classes with us and present on this material to their peers. We also have a summit, several summer summits. So we'll offer these 4-day long camps sort of for students to come to and spend 4 days really digging in and learning about relationships. And I think we've done that maybe for 7 years now. And last year we had 60 or more kids that participated in that with us over the summer. So
That's
doing
really great. I hadn't heard about that before, so that's really cool. Another question is there a resource that could help a victim or survivor whose phone has been compromised by their abuser, whether Dove or if you know one otherwise?
So if their phone has been compromised?
Yeah, if their phone was compromised by their abuser.
There are some programs, I think through the sheriff's office, that where people can get a new phone. It's usually just, one of those basic phones. We also have worked with some people to be able to go directly to a store, like a Verizon store or something, and have people look to see if there's any device monitoring programming happening on their cell phone. There's a tech person at Jane Doe that's sometimes able to has some resources on how people can look for that on their own. And then I also just saw an article that was talking about if an abusive person is the named person on the cell phone contract, there really is not a lot that a victim can do to remove themselves from that or regain access. So we can try to help do some advocacy around that, but some of that's a little beyond our abilities and might require someone to get a new phone that we can assist with.
I think this next question is related to the summit that you mentioned. Someone's curious if college students can also participate.
So right now we just are doing these summits for high school students. I think it's something we'd like to expand to other areas, both to middle school students, so younger and older as well. So the colleges in our catchment area are Curry College, Quincy College, and Eastern Nazarene College. And so a lot of the Boston area colleges are connected with the Boston area domestic violence organizations, but it's something we're definitely interested in, is more us hiring more staff to do some of these more programs.
And the final question for now, the person did say they know you might get to this a little later, but they're curious if you have statistics specific to elders in Massachusetts, 60 and older, what percentage of reported DV cases involve elders? And if you're going to get to that in a bit, we can skip that for now.
I don't have a specific slide on that or statistic, but I can, in the chat, I can share a resource that will give some more information specifically to the elder population.
Okay, great. That's all the questions for now. If you have questions from the audience, please keep them coming, and we'll stop again in a bit for any other questions.
Great. I'm going to show another video from Join One Love organization, foundation. This is portrayal of what you'll see is an abusive relationship. There is some just a content warning. There's some shouting, some yelling. At one point, the person that's abusive does smash a bottle. So I want to show this just because I think it can show a pretty realistic example of what a cycle might look like for someone in an abusive relationship. So intentionally, the video is shot that it kind of jumps around a little bit, but I'll show it and then we can discuss it.
One more.
I'll call you tomorrow. I'm gonna be home a little late tonight.
Okay. How late?
12, maybe 1.
12. Okay. All right, I guess just call me when you get home.
Okay.
Someone's trying to get a hold of you.
Yeah.
Hey, Allie.
Oh, hey, Sam. What are you doing?
Just eating your chips. Tried calling you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just got your text.
Where was your phone?
It was in my bag.
Didn't you hear it?
Well, I just got the text when I walked in.
It can't be that hard to pick up your phone, Allie.
I did let you know. I told you. I told you I was gonna be out with Katie.
Was it just Katie? You're just having too much of a good time with Katie? I'm worried about where you are, and all you reply back is, I'm busy.
I should have picked it up.
It's your
I'm sorry.
phone! You always have your phone! You know what I mean? Yeah?
I didn't hear it.
How did you not hear your phone, Allie?
I already answered that question.
You know how easy it is to pick up. I just want to apologize for tonight. I just don't get it. Why couldn't you just pick up your phone?
I told you. You're overreacting, Sam.
Allie, I'm not overreacting, okay?
Yeah, it's not that big a deal.
It is a big deal. That's the problem. It doesn't make sense! Allie, that doesn't make sense! I'm so sorry. It'll never happen again. I'm so sorry. Hey. Tried calling you.
So you can see this relationship, it's a lot of ups and downs, and can be one of the indicators of an abusive relationship. So some of you might be familiar with this concept of a cycle. It's not something everyone identifies with in their relationship, but many times victims and survivors will talk about feeling like their relationship started off in this honeymoon stage where everything was great. There was a lot of kindness and fun and respect, and everyone loved this person. There was some element of permanence that was established. So maybe you're moving in together, saying I love you, something that sort of really establishes the relationship. And then there begins to be some tension building, which can feel like walking on eggshells, can then continue to escalate to, this refers to as the battering stage, maybe an explosive stage, or something's abusive is happening. After that, we often see people, especially the first time, leave or end the relationship. I don't want to be with someone that talks to me this way. This isn't good for me or for my children. I'm moving out. I'm getting a restraining order. I'm done with this relationship. And then, not coincidentally, this person returns to how they were at the beginning of the relationship. Suddenly they're again kind and loving and respectful. This can also look like, I am so sorry. This is never going to happen again. I only did this because I love you so much. I'm going to stop drinking. I'm going to get counseling. Please don't break up our family. Please give me another chance. And so this person is saying all the right things, and they're maybe taking some steps towards that. And so you can really understand why someone would want to give that person another chance. And so we see people get back into those relationships. The restraining orders are dropped. And so on the outside, as a service provider, we're like, what are you doing? Like, this relationship is so abusive. This is manipulative. This is controlling. This person's never going to change. But when someone's inside of that cycle, it is so hard to see it for what it is. It is so confusing, overwhelming, and there's so much manipulation there. And so I think it's really important to remember how much manipulation is happening behind the scenes so that we can have empathy and understanding for when the people that we work with might drop that restraining order or might get back together with that person that's been abusive to them. So you can see that a little bit in this video, where it's like, at the end, he's saying, I'm so sorry. It's never going to happen again. I love you. She's hugging him. But then it's like, you can tell they've had a lot of good fun times, but then it's like, you're just grilling me. You're not dropping it. You're smashing a bottle because I didn't answer my phone when I was studying. And you could see how her friends maybe are like, what are you doing? Like, why are you with this person? And then for her, there's so much more happening that can make it really hard to make that permanent decision to step away. This is another image that people might be familiar with, the power and control wheel. In Duluth, Minnesota, they did a lot of interviews with, at this time was just with straight women, asking questions about their abusive partners, and found that all of them were talking about these same sort of 8 different types of manipulation and control. And so they created this image that's called the power and control wheel, which really has like all of the spokes around being using emotional abuse, isolation, children, privilege, economic abuse, with just the threat of physical or sexual violence as being what holds it all together, with power and control in the middle. So we have more gender neutral version of this on our website that people are welcome to download and use with clients. But yeah, through their research, this was kind of showing that all these people were talking about sort of these 8 different elements of abuse. So I want to get into our first common misconception, that is that leaving is always an option. And so sometimes people don't realize that leaving can actually be the most dangerous thing for someone to do. We never, of course, talk someone out of leaving, But we also never tell someone to leave. And so if someone is looking to leave a relationship that has been abusive, we want to do a lot of safety planning with that person, knowing that they're at higher risk, at least for those first few months. We also want to just acknowledge that there's economic dependence, there's fear of retaliation. People may have been really isolated by their partner. They might love that person and still be holding on to this hope for change. And so I think just a reminder that this might be really something that you all are very well aware of, but I would certainly say that still outside of my work at Dove, people will just say in a genuine way, like, if this relationship was abusive, why doesn't this person just leave? And feeling like that is an answer when we look at some of the domestic violence homicides, even this year, and read the narratives of what's happened. So many of those people, it's their former partner, their ex-partner. And so we see people that have taken those steps, that have gotten restraining orders, that have left, and that abuse has gotten worse, and in some cases has resulted in homicide. So these are just a few quotes from folks about reasons that they aren't able to leave. There's no room, there's no shelter space. I'm afraid that I'm going to lose custody of my kids. I'm afraid of what will happen if if the abusive person has 50-50 custody. They've never been alone with the other person. There's financial dependence. My family doesn't believe in divorce. And so really just thinking about how complex those decisions are. This is another image that we'll use to just show how similar the risks are to staying and the risks are to leaving can really result in a lot of the same consequences. And so we know that people are weighing these internally. Like, if I leave, maybe it's better for me. Is it going to be better for my kids? They're leaving their school, they're leaving their friends. Are they going to blame me for breaking up the family, right? And just really thinking about how much is at stake in making these decisions to leave and to stay. So misconception number 2 that I want to talk about is abuse is caused by co-occurring issues. And so these are some of the most common sort of co-occurring issues: mental health, a low self-esteem of the abusive person, substance abuse of the abusive person, anger management, you provoked me, and external stressors. We know that we could do a whole workshop on just these, but we know that these certainly exacerbate an abusive person's behaviors. They do not cause someone to be controlling and have power over the person they're in a relationship with. So we often hear people saying, my partner has bipolar disorder, my partner has anger management problems. Someone may have a substance abuse issue and be abusive. If you address the substance abuse issue, the abuse might look different, but it is not addressing the internal desire to have power and control over your partner. And so, so important that people get the right type of help and support. I have on here a couple options that are really great to know about. But like I said, we could spend a lot of time talking about each of these individually. I think mental illness is one of the most common excuses that I hear. One way that we'll talk about that is that someone with a mental illness or someone with, for example, bipolar disorder doesn't get to decide when and in front of who they are going to show some of their behaviors. That is very much out of their control, which is really vastly different from how an abusive person operates, that they are very tactful about who and when they show these abusive behaviors. So it's much more likely for an abusive person to be lovely and kind and respectful and wonderful in public, and then behind closed doors to be degrading, controlling, and abusive. And so that shows a pretty good deal of control and thoughtfulness around behaviors. And so that really helps us to differentiate it from someone that has mental illness. So a very quick overview of some of this. Abusive people, it is a learned behavior. It is a choice, and certainly is exacerbated by other situations, but I'm going to cover a few after this misconception, some services that are available for people that are abusive. So I'd know an abusive person if I saw one. We have a lot of these stereotypes that really lead us to think of this sort of image of what someone that's abusive would look like. They'd be angry, they'd have a criminal record, they'd have trouble getting along with others, stress, they might have addiction or mental health issues. So there is a percentage of abusive people that fit this stereotype. In the chat, does anyone want to throw in what they think the actual percentage is of abusive people that fit this stereotype? There is a percentage. Anyone can take a guess. I've got a 65, 40, 20, 15. So it's right around 25. And so that is high enough that it sort of is reinforcing our internal belief system about what an abusive person looks like. But what that really means is that 75% of the time, an abusive person does not fit any of these stereotypes. And an abusive person is, like we talked about, maybe that neighbor that everybody loves, that shovels out your driveway, that coaches a kid's soccer team, and everyone is like, they're so wonderful, they would never do this. It's also a great way for an abusive person to manipulate that to their partner by saying, nobody else has a problem with me, it's just you. And really can reinforce that idea that maybe it is my fault. Maybe I am causing this to be happening. And so I think this is so, so important when we're working with someone, if we also know of the partner, to not make those assumptions of like, they're so kind, they always accompany, them to appointments, and they're always, right there, and maybe mistaking some of that connection or involvement for being a good partner. It may be so, but to always just be thinking that we're not going to be misled by some of the stereotypes that we have. This is an amazing resource that's new within the last year or two. It's called a Call for Change helpline. It is for people that use abusive behaviors. So it is open from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. The number is here. They return voicemails. It is confidential, free, and anonymous. And so this is for people that are abusive. Again, I think about people that are abusive on a spectrum. There are those people that no matter how you told them, who told them, how you explained it, the detriment that you showed to them, would never admit that they were causing harm, that they had control over their behaviors, that this is their fault, that they need help. Then there are people here that are maybe like, I don't know, like my relationships keep ending. I keep getting this feedback. I don't think that I'm abusive. But I also don't want this pattern to keep happening. And then, of course, there's people that are like, I know I have a problem and I need help. But for people that are kind of on this end, there are starting to be some resources to help people address some of that. And so people can call this number and talk to someone that is not going to just condone their behavior and let them vent and say it must be so hard, but to work with them on on why they felt it was appropriate, why other behaviors that they could have done, how they do have control over what they're doing, what their intention is. And so really kind of call people into conversation around some of these harmful behaviors. There are also intimate partner abuse education programs. Emerge is one of those. There's quite a few throughout the state. And these are programs that work specifically with people that are abusive in group settings. And so this is like, maybe for those people that are like either court ordered, maybe they violated a restraining order, or it's part of their service plan with the Department of Children and Families. Or maybe someone is like, I don't want to keep messing up my life and I want to get some help. There are these programs that people can go to. They're 40 weeks long, and people are in group on a weekly basis with other people that are abusive, learning about their patterns of behavior and learning how to call each other out on those behaviors. So why it is more effective than individual counseling is these facilitators are specifically trained to work with people that are abusive, but they're also doing what's called partner contacts. And so they're calling the identified victim and hearing both sides of a situation and a story. And so it is very easy for an abusive person to manipulate an individual therapist into weave them right into their story, and that they're the victim. This is all happening to them. It is much harder to do that in a room of other people that are going to call you out on your behavior. And if you're hearing both sides of the story from the victim as well. So really, really good resources to know about. In the last section that we have here, I want to talk a little bit about safety planning. The goals of safety planning really being to reduce fear and anxiety. We always want to remember that the client is the expert. It is very likely that a client might say to you, what should I do? Just tell me what to do and I'll do it. I think it is so, so important, especially when it comes to leaving, when it comes to anything legal. We do a whole 10-session training for folks where we really talk about it's sometimes people with the best intentions that can cause the most damage. And so we really challenge people to be very cautious about giving any kind of legal advice, even if it's so well intended. And so we sometimes see people are like, you have to go and get a restraining order, or you have to go and file for custody, and are really urging someone to enter the legal system. Restraining orders can work really well for people. They also can really exacerbate a situation. Sometimes filing for custody can just invite the other person in to file paperwork as well. And so a lot of what we're doing is just really thinking things all the way through as to the potential benefits and consequences to a lot of these behaviors. And so it is so important to connect with a domestic violence specialist. But we also know that people will stay connected with who they are already connected to, and so want other people to have some of these skills as well. There's a great safety planning tool on the hotline.org where you can create a safety plan. And so it goes through basics, homeschool, job, tech, partner, children, emotional abuse, and you can kind of type it out or just talk it out with the person that you're working with to help create that safety plan. Some really important statistics to know about, and these are from the Jeannie Geiger Crisis Center. The first 3 months after separation is the most dangerous time. Again, someone in the chat I saw was saying, when you're breaking off that person's ability to have control, we often will see those behaviors escalate to try to reestablish that control. After a year, someone's risk drops dramatically. Only about 4% of homicide victims have worked with victim services. So that tells us a couple things. First, hopefully that people that are connected to a domestic violence organization, their risk drops dramatically. It also can tell us that sometimes the people that are at the most risk are not getting to us, aren't reaching out, or might not feel safe coming to us. And so how can we tell other people outside of us, family, friends, schools, jobs, how to help support people that might be in need? And then in Massachusetts, 40% of homicides are murder-suicides. There's just one, I think, in Kingston, I think this past weekend. So the threat of suicide of an abusive person is considered a really big red flag for the victim. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. When people are coming to us, we're doing a risk assessment with them. We're establishing a history of what's happened in that relationship that helps us to predict what's going to happen in the future, and then to create a relevant safety plan. So a study that was done looking at some of the risk assessment forms found that only about 50% of victims were able to accurately assess their own level of risk. And so part of that being that someone may have lived with this type of abuse for so long that it has become, someone may have become numb to it, may be so isolated that are not fully realizing how high risk their situation might be, or just as a means of survival have had to not focus on how scary their situation might be. And so that can be helpful just in when you're meeting with someone and you're asking questions and someone is saying, maybe minimizing their situation, or sort of making excuses for their partner, and just thinking about this may have been something that they have been living with for a very long time. So these are some of the most high risk factors to look and listen for. Having a gun is the strongest risk factor, increases the risk of homicide by more than 5 times. So we're always asking about if the abusive person has access to a firearm. Have they made threats to kill? Has there been any choking or strangulation in the relationship? Have you recently separated? And then has the abusive person threatened to commit suicide? We know that that can be linked to homicide. And so any of these are really going to put someone in a high risk category. And so we will share that with folks, and we'll say, from what you've told me, I'm really scared for you. I know that having a gun in the home, greatly increases your risk. I want to work with you to help find some ways to keep you safe. We can never promise someone safety. There's nothing that we can do to guarantee someone's safety. It is one of the hardest parts of this line of work, is we also can't force someone to leave. You might be sitting with someone that tells you a lot of really scary information, and if you share with them your concerns, you offer them resources, you put together a safety plan, and you don't have any ability to keep that person safe. That is a really hard part of our job. And so we also encourage other service providers to call us. You can call us on our hotline. You can call us in our office and say, I'm working with someone, I'm really scared for them. What else can I do? What can I offer to this person? Couple just thoughts about high risk populations. We know that particularly the trans community experiences much higher rates of domestic violence and sexual assault, again, not because of their identity, but because of transphobia and folks using the fact that someone using parts of someone's identity to control them. Also, people experiencing poverty and homelessness, people with disability, immigrants, young people, all experience domestic violence and sexual violence at disproportional rates. A couple of protective factors that are helpful to be aware of. The employment, both of the batterer and the survivor, this should say abuser. If the abusive person is employed, really it's that they have less time to be preoccupied with the victim or survivor. They also have some accountability. They have something to lose by acting out. The more connected a survivor is, the lower their risk, and certainly drawing on their ability to have protected themselves in the past. So some other risk factors, like, has this abusive person been named on previous restraining orders? Have they violated them? Is there a history of substance abuse and mental health? Are they overly jealous? All of these can just sort of add to someone's risk level. And so I won't read through all of these. You all will have the slides here, but this just goes through some tips on safety planning depending on someone's situation. Safety planning is hard to do a presentation on because it is so specific to someone's situation. So of course, there's not a one size fits all safety plan, but we're really thinking with somebody about what would you do if you ran into this person in public? What would you do if they showed up at your house? What would you do if they called? What would you do if your child answered the door? What do you do if you're living with this person and things start to escalate? And really just helping people think through, in these moments of high stress and fear, what are the plans that you can have in place to help keep yourself safe? So these are living with the abuser. This is preparing to leave. After leaving, things to think about: changing up your schedule, your route to work. How unpredictable can you be? For children, things to think about doing with them. Can you have a safe word? Explaining things in age-appropriate ways, reminding them what's happening is not their fault. And so every situation is different. A lot of these might not apply to someone's situation, but some templates for sort of starting that conversation. The last two things I have are just about offering trauma-informed services, understanding that living in a domestic violence situation is an ongoing traumatic experience where someone may get sort of stuck in this fight or flight response that may make it difficult for them to focus, concentrate, articulate other things that are happening in their life. And so sometimes we can have really punitive responses to people that have experienced trauma and say they've missed their appointments, or they always come late, or they can't tell a story to us in a clear way, so we're not going to work with this person. And really understanding that a lot of these behaviors can be a direct result of the abuse and the trauma that they've experienced in the home. Someone is so focused on staying alive and predicting this other person's next step that having the mental ability to focus on some of these other areas really gets diminished. And so this is not to say that survivors are in any way having this permanent loss, but just to really understand what it's like to try to function when you're also just trying to stay alive all the time. These last two slides, I won't read them, but are just some great tips on what to say. Thank you for telling me. I'm sorry what you're going through. What not to say. You should leave. You should get a restraining order. It sounds like your partner is under a lot of stress. And then lastly, we really utilize the empowerment model, which is to remember that survivors are the experts. If we take over telling them what to do and what not to do, we're just emulating that same kind of controlling behavior. So this is the last slide. I know we're out of time. If anyone wants to write in the chat, and we have a minute, Charlotte can read a couple of them. One thing you learned that you can use in your practice with clients or supportive survivors, you're welcome to do that. If you need to leave, thank you so much for coming today. Really, really appreciate you spending your morning talking about a heavy issue. These slides will be available to everyone, my email as well. So if people have more questions, please feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much, Jen. This was so full of information and just really, really a great presentation, a great overview of DV and the resources that are available in Massachusetts specifically. As Jen said, we are going to be sharing the slides, her contact information, as well as a recording of this presentation with all attendees. We do have a question, one last question. Are there programs in different languages, and where can we access information and resources in different languages? I can answer the second part a little bit on behalf of MOVA. Brenna also dropped in the chat the 2 links to our safety planning brochures in a multitude of languages, as well as the Victim Bill of Rights in a multitude of languages. I'll also just verbally say we have the ability to translate into other languages beyond that. So if you're looking for a language and you don't see it, just reach out to us at mova@mass.gov and we can get any resource translated for you. But I'll also give you an opportunity, Jen, if you know of any multilingual services or resources. You're on mute, I think.
We also, we have advocates that speak several different languages. We also have translation information available on our website. I believe we have brochures both in Chinese, Portuguese, and Haitian Creole. And depending on what staff we have are able to offer some counseling in other languages as well.
That is all the questions that I'm seeing, but we're getting a ton of thank yous in the chat. So that is just another kudos to you and how great this presentation was. Brenna did drop in the chat as well, just some of MOVA's resources and an evaluation for this training as well. If folks have time to fill that out, I'll also include those links in the follow-up email as well. But with that, we will close out. Thank you so much again, Jen. Thank you all for attending. This was a really, really great presentation. And I hope everyone has a great rest of the day.
Great. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.